Get started. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. I believe YouTube is the platform. We do have closed captioning enabled, so if that's helpful for folks' participation, on the bottom of your screen, you can click on the show captions or where it says CC, if that's helpful for your participation and contribution today. And then for everyone who's a RAC member, I see some wonderful modeling already. If you could label yourself by renaming, by clicking on your image box or name box, I don't know what you call these things. You click on the ellipses, go to rename, and just identify yourself as a RAC member, both for me as a facilitator, but also for folks that are joining in the public, really differentiating between the different roles in the room. We've got a lot of folks on screen and in the room today. So I know folks will keep joining, but I'm going to kick us off. So I just welcome folks. I'll do a little bit more of my introduction in a few minutes, but my name is Ben Duncan. I'll be your lead facilitator, joined by a great team that we'll introduce soon. But before moving forward, I want to introduce several speakers that are going to kick us off and really welcome us and ground us in where we're going in this process. So we'll hear from, I think in this order, the Director of DLCD, Brenda Bateman, Commissioner Alan Laszlo from the Land and Conservation Development Commission, and then Matthew Shabold from the Governor's Office. So Brenda, I think I'm going to pass it to you first.
Thank you, Ben. It's good to see you again. It's good to see so many old friends and future friends here on the screen. I'm very excited about this kickoff today. So my name is Brenda Bateman. I'm the Director of the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I use she, her pronouns. And I just wanted to thank this group and the RAC members for your commitment to this work. I think it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be really important and really good. I wanted to offer a couple of thoughts about the work that's ahead of you. You have a hefty job. We're trying to reform a system here that's been in place for quite some time, and frankly has resulted in outcomes that did not benefit everyone. I think you all know that. So we're working within a framework set forth by the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis and House Bill 2001 from last year's legislative session. It's really set a nice framework for you all and for us to do this work. But now we need to fill in the details. And I would encourage you to do so creatively and courageously. This is the time. Housing in the future, I don't think it's going to look like it has looked in the past. So there's a lot of room for work and for your ideas as part of these discussions. And one thing that I just wanted to note is that this is an opportunity for us to link housing to the other goals that we have, how we want our communities to look, how we want to be in community together. So this is the time where we can be linking the housing policies that we have with our climate policies and where we need to go with that, linking it to our infrastructure and the financing of that, linking it to equity, and linking it to the access that we want these communities to have in terms of jobs and education and recreation and that gallon of milk in the morning. So just be thinking about how all of these things can play together in this space creatively and courageously. Before I end, I just wanted to also thank our local partners for all the work they've already done in this space. They've made some great strides, and we're going to continue as an agency to look for opportunities throughout this discussion for continued partnership with our local jurisdictions and local partners, and also looking out a bit further into 2025, the legislative session, we'll be looking for ways to garner more support and resources for our partners that have very limited capacity. We want to make sure that they stay healthy and that they're able to be at the table and doing the work that's so important. So we're looking for those partnership and resource opportunities. I just wanted to throw that out there as we're watching and participating over these next several meetings. Those are the kinds of things that we'll be looking for. So I'm going to stay on this morning and listen to the conversation and your introductions. I want to get to know each of you better. And then as part of our moving on with the program, I'd like to hand it off to Alan Laszlo, our LCDC Commissioner and Liaison for this work. Thank you all. Alan.
Great. Good morning, all. Thank you, Director Bateman. For folks, good morning. My name is Alan Lazo. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a current commissioner with the Land Conservation and Development Commission. I'm also, folks might recognize me, I'm also the recently retired executive director at the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. So even though I'm no longer with the organization, I continue to carry the flag of the fair housing movement. It's so great to see so many folks here this morning. It's like 3 screens worth of people, and many of you who have been with this process with us for a long time, and some of you who are new coming to it. And so it really reminds me that this is a sort of like a relay race that we've been running for a conversation that started, almost 5 years ago now. And really started in a conversation that was really about how do we more equitably distribute housing need in our communities across the state. In that time, we also recognize that every single one of our communities has a housing crisis that we're facing, and we need to understand where that fits into the context of the Goal 10 process. In this long relay race that we're running, we are now taking the baton from those who have laid out this process already for where we're headed with our statewide planning Goal 10 to produce more fair and equitable housing. And we're here now to help bring it across the finish line and really operationalize that process and answer some really key critical questions that take us to the finish line of this process. There are pieces of this that are already in place, already in motion, and our local partners are continuing to move those forward. So we also really need to recognize that as we move through this race, that this process lays out a balance between, as the DLCD team has laid out, this between production, affordability, and choice. And as Director Bateman said, this is not just a link between these, but we really need to understand how we balance those elements of the OHNA work. We know, again, that every community in the state faces a housing crisis and the need to increase production. We also recognize that production and supply is only part of the answer that we need in our housing crisis right now. We really do need to pay attention to what it will take to balance and meet the affordability and choice needs of every member of our community, which hasn't always been part of the Goal 10 process. So this long relay race for which we're called here now for what will be the final anchor leg, we hope, puts us on a path to create a Goal 10 process now that is intended to meet that original objective of Goal 10 and meeting the housing needs of every person in Oregon. Having been through several of the rulemaking processes and part of the legislative process, one of the things I really appreciate about rulemaking is that it becomes this extension of the democratization of the legislative process, and here particularly to remake the Goal 10 process in our state and balance the perspectives from many different stakeholders that we've gathered here, particularly from those who are both implementing these measures locally and those who will benefit from or who are serving those who will benefit from the measures that we're going to lay out here today. I think we're going to do introductions further later, but one of the things I will remind folks is that, again, some of you know me from the fair housing world and the fair housing movement, but I'm also here serving in a role as a liaison back to the Land Conservation and Development Commission and my colleagues there. And so we'll be working to bring these perspectives back as we continue to contemplate how this work moves forward. So I just want to thank you all for being here and also thank the DLCD team for the work that they've done, again, over the last 5 years in this long relay race and getting us so close to the finish line here over what will really be another probably couple of years together. So thank you all so much.
And I think we're going to pass it then to Matthew Schabold, who's hopefully somewhere on our.
I'm here.
There you are. Thank you, Matthew. Jump in, please.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Matthew Schabold, I use he, him pronouns. I'm with the governor's office, and I'm just here to share a few remarks on behalf of the governor. One of the governor's kind of 3 priority areas is addressing housing production, housing affordability, and homelessness. She's long been a champion for really addressing the housing and homelessness crisis in the state and advancing Goal 10. She obviously was a champion for the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis when she was speaker, and that continues to be a priority for her as governor. And so we just really we'll appreciate all of the work and time that everyone on this group is going to be putting into this process. It's really critical for the state, and it's really critical for Oregonians and helping to address the needs that the governor has heard about during her One Oregon tour across all of Oregon's counties. We also really appreciate the work of the DLCD team. The new housing division, which I'll shout out, is doing really great work. And we're excited that the housing division is expanding and really bringing on some top talent. So appreciate Director Bateman and Ethan and the whole team. We're going to be closely coordinating with the department as we go through this process, given that housing production and housing affordability is such a priority for the governor. And we just also want to reinforce that this is the process to engage in. We know we're going to be talking about a lot of complicated and tough issues as we go through the process. And please have this be the space, have this be the process in which you engage with the department, and just really appreciate everyone's time. And I'll just say as a side comment, it's terrible that this is the meeting that I found out that Alan retired in, because he's been such a champion for fair housing. So congratulations on your retirement, but we're glad you're still engaged. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, retired from one element of the work, but actively engaged in other actions, advancing the work. So thank you for those wonderful opening words. One last housekeeping piece. If you at any point, we're going to be throughout all of our process using multiple kind of technologies, including Zoom. So hopefully folks are relatively familiar. I will add that Ingrid, if you could raise your hand real quick. Ingrid with DLCD is here. You can give a little wave if folks can see you. If there's tech challenges, please feel free to chat Ingrid, who can hopefully help you navigate any of those. One of the key things, of course, with a group this size, we'll be using, familiarize yourself. There's not a raised hand icon, so you'll have to go to reactions. So if you click on reactions, if you want to get in the queue at any point in our conversations, click on that. There's a raise hand button. You can also clap, thumbs up, cry, be startled. So hopefully there won't be too many startling moments, but just wanted to make sure folks knew where that was. So if we could pull up some slides, we're going to walk through how we're going to spend our next few hours together, and then we'll move our way into some introductions of folks that will be supporting this process, and then work to introduce you as well. So we just heard from from our partners here around the opening comments. We're going to introduce our project team, walk through what we're hoping to move through today. We'll have some time to do kind of our first round of getting to know each other. And at the first part of this will really just be kind of name and who you are. We'll have a little bit more opportunity to share kind of what brings you here at a later part of our agenda. We'll take a break, and then we'll move into some substantive conversation around kind of what the legislative context and direction is around HB 2001 and 2889, create some space for you all to ensure that we're collectively grounded in the work that we're having here. So reflecting back on the charge, be able to reflect a little bit around kind of your connection and relationship to what we have in front of us. We'll talk about the decision-making process and how this rulemaking fits in with a variety of other structures. And then we'll work towards closing our meeting, and hopefully folks had a chance to review and familiarize yourself with the operating principles document that was shared prior to the meeting. We'll have a conversation just to make sure, again, we are grounded in the way that we're going to work together. We'll close with next steps. We have a meeting coming up pretty soon. So we'll be, these first two meetings will come really rapidly. So if we go to the next slide, what we're hoping today, and I kind of outline some of this, we'll learn who's in the room, both around the RAC rulemaking. So RAC Rulemaking Advisory Committee. So hopefully I wanted to say that. We're going to say RAC, but you'll know what that means. But you know who's around the room with the RAC, with the staff that's going to be supporting and surrounding this process, and then the facilitation and consultant team that will be hopefully valuable partners as we do our work together. We'll have a chance again to introduce ourselves to each other, and really start thinking about, again, this connection that I would argue would be the foundation for our work, right? What brings us here in a shared vision and shared direction for what we're hoping to contribute and accomplish. And then again, just really grounding ourselves in the legislative direction, decision-making, rulemaking deadlines, milestones. As Commissioner Lazo said, this is a bit of a race. We're trying to do a lot of work in a short period of time, and that's going to come with a real understanding of what we need to achieve and by when. And then we'll sit with the operating agreements or the charter, including really having some shared expectations of not just our team as folks that are supporting this process, but making sure everyone around this room knows what their role is. And then just as a preview to our next conversation, we'll really be diving into the policy context and some of the issue areas that we're going to have to grapple with as we move through this process. Any questions about our agenda or what we're hoping to walk away with today? Okay. Not seeing any hands. This was the first chance to practice your raised hand. So, okay, no questions. Good. Well, let's if we can take the slides down. We want to kind of work through some introductions, and I'm going to start. So, as I said at the beginning, Ben Duncan. I'm a senior director and senior facilitator with Kearns and West, and we're part of a larger consultant team that I'll ask to introduce themselves, and part of this broader DLCD team that will really be supporting this process as we go forward. Because I'll be in front of you for a lot in this process, I'll give a little bit of an extended introduction. I like to say I cut my teeth as an environmental justice organizer. I grew up professionally in public health, and I've spent 7 years as the Chief Diversity and Equity Officer at Multnomah County. My first title was Community Connector in what's now the Healthy Homes Program. So just a deep, long relationship with housing and the impacts of housing on people's lives, and particularly through a health-based lens. Since joining Kearns and West, I've really had some really just remarkable and unique opportunities. Many of you in this room I've been able to engage with in this type of work, right? How do we design, structure, and process that is productive and constructive and set upon a sense of values and principles. And I want to name some of those just for some grounding for you all. So we're going to talk about group expectations later in the agenda. And importantly, as I said, there's some key values that I think are critical for my role. And I want you all to just kind of know right up front how I plan to and want to and hope to approach my role as a facilitator. First, I'm committed to ensuring that every single person in this room has a voice, that everyone in this room feels heard, and in practice that means that I'll be constantly working to ensure that we're balancing time we speak, that I'm paying attention to how power is distributed and being wielded in this room, whether that's because of positional authority or differences in technical knowledge or accessibility to information, or other dynamics that inherently show up in environments like this, whether that's race, gender, age, things that can influence who is heard, who feels they have agency, who can influence process, all of these pieces that I feel are critical for us to pay attention to. So that's part of my role, and I'm going to challenge each and every one of us to see it as your role as well. That also means that there may be times when I ask to folks to bring into the conversation who haven't spoken, or ask folks to step back who have been speaking too much, but also that we begin often with reflection or response or input from groups and organizations that have historically not been seated at these tables. And I say that with great intention because I actually really applaud the work that DLCD has done to building out a RAC that does look different than many rulemaking bodies. And that means for both myself as a facilitator and each and every one of us in this room, we have an opportunity and an obligation to kind of do this work, align with the values of equitable and inclusive process. And as Commissioner Lazo said, I really loved, right, this idea of RACs being an extension of democratization. And we have a chance collectively to really define what that means. And then finally, I'm really committed and alongside my colleagues to embedding equity analysis and consideration into our process and not as an add-on later on in the process, meaning that we're going to work really to diligently ensure as we explore concepts, issues, and approaches to rules, that we're doing so considering historical and contemporaneous context, that we're understanding benefits and burdens with a specific focus on marginalized populations, and a focus on those who are most negatively impacted by housing insecurity, lack of access, lack of choice to housing, and hopefully dedicating ourselves to this commitment to mitigating negative impacts while being really honed in on lifting up those that will lead towards more positive and equitable outcomes. And then my only other commitment is to make sure that I'm available and accessible to each and every one of you through this process. We're going to use multiple ways of seeking out input, including surveys between meetings, so you can provide feedback and reflection on how we structured these conversations, what your experience has been, what do you need or expect or want to see change from a facilitation standpoint. And I hope that as we go through this process, and I don't know all of you, but I hope to know many of you better, that we're creating a space of trust. So you feel confident that the feedback you provide will be heard and incorporated in the best ways that we can. So I'm going to pause there and introduce some of my consultant team colleagues, and then you'll get an introduction to our DLCD staff who will be supporting this process. So I'm going to start with my colleague, Ellen Palmquist, if you could say hello.
Hi everyone, Ellen Palmquist, use she, her pronouns, and I'm with the Kearns and West facilitation team.
Great, thank you. And then we have Lorelei and Madeline in the room together. Lorelei.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lorelei Jensen with Echo Northwest, the lead for the consultant team. And
hi, everyone. Madeline Barron. I'm a senior project manager. I'm happy to be involved with some of the day-to-day organization on the consultant team.
Great, thank you. And then Anita, I'd love to have you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Ben. Hello, everybody. Anita Kahilani Yap. Pronouns are she, they, and I am the racial equity advisor. I know some of you, just background, I've been a land use planner and worked with DLCD for over 25 years and worked in local government as a planning director, community development director, so and involved in rules advisory for a number of years. So I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Deb?
Hi, good morning. Deb Myhoff with Communitas. So glad to be here and see so many familiar faces. I am part of the consultant team working as a sub to Echo Northwest, do facilitation and planning work.
Thank you, Deb. And then I think I'm going to you, Ethan.
Thanks, Ben. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ethan Stuckmeyer. I'm the manager of the Housing Services Division at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I'm so excited about today. There's been a lot of work that has led to this moment, and I'm so pumped to begin this process with you all. So I have a whole bunch of people from DLCD to introduce, and I think that's a testament to just how critical and important this work is to DLCD. So I'm going to start first with Ingrid Caudell.
Morning, everyone. Ingrid Caudell. I'm the Advisory Committee Coordinator for DLCD, and I'll pass it over to Sean.
Hi, folks. My name is Sean Edging, Housing Planner at DLCD. I'll pass it over to Thea.
Hello, everybody. Thea Croman, Housing Policy Analyst with DLCD, and I will pass it to Mari.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mari Valencia Aguilar. I use she, her, they pronouns, and I'm a housing planner with the department. Pass it over to Jenna.
Hi, everyone. Jenna Hughes, she, her pronouns. I am the Housing and Growth Management Analyst with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and I will pass it to Karin.
Buenos dias. Good morning. Karin Guillen Chapman. I also use Karen. She, her pronouns, and I serve as the UGB specialist for the department. I'm going to pass it over to Celestina.
Good morning, everybody. Celestina Teva, she and they pronouns, housing planner, and I will at DLCD, and I will pass it to, I think, Madeline, maybe? Are you on still?
Yep.
Great.
Good morning, all. My name is Madeline Phillips. We have a Mari, and we also have a Madeline. I'm Maddie to friends colleagues. But I am the public facilities planner with the Housing and Urbanization Division.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ethan.
Yes, and I have a couple other folks from DLCD that I just want to make sure everybody's aware in the room. We've already heard from Brenda for the welcome. Thank you, our director. I also want to say hi to Kevin Young.
Thanks, Ethan. I'm Kevin Young. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a senior urban planner with the department. Prior to this effort, I've worked on the middle housing rulemaking as well as the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. So happy to join you today. Very exciting effort.
Thank you. And Casaria Taylor.
Hi, good morning. I'm Casaria Taylor, the Rules and Records Coordinator for the agency.
And Palmer.
Yeah, thank you, Ethan. And sorry, everyone, I'm feeling a little under the weather, so I'm gonna stay off camera, but happy to be a part of this process. I am the Senior Policy Advisor at DLCD and look forward to engaging with you all. Thanks, Ethan.
And last but not least, Sadie Carney.
Good morning, everyone. Sadie Carney, I use she, her pronouns, and I do communications and community engagement for DLCD. Excited to be here with you all.
Thanks, Ben. I think that's it from DLCD. Big crew.
Yeah, it is a big group. Well, thank you. We'll be leaning on y'all, I'm sure, in many different ways as we go through this process. So I'm going to ask if folks are not RAC members, if you could go off screen. I'm going to try to find a way that I can see RAC members primarily. Y'all are a good looking group. Okay. So thank you. So we're going to do introductions. There's going to be a couple things that are going to be happening as we do this. So we're going to put a link in the chat to I believe it's a Menti poll word cloud that has a question. So as we're doing introductions, we'll ask you to do that. We're going to come back to it a little later, but as we go through this, we'll ask you to utilize that technology. So I'm going to go. I have a list of folks, and I'm going to go in alphabetical order based on my roster here, and hopefully it's accurate and I won't miss anybody. So I'm going to start with Alan Hines. And if you could say your name, pronoun, and organization or community affiliation, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Alan Hines. I'm the Housing Access Director at Community Vision.
We are a service agency for people with disabilities.
We're a service agency for people with disability. My pronouns are he and him. And I'm in the Portland area. Did I miss anything?
No, you got it, Alan. Thank you. Welcome. Appreciate you being here. I have Anna Molina, but I thought we saw Joel. Are you representing Anna today?
I'm Anna today. Hey, y'all. Jolie Bo, I also go by Joel, he, him, his. I'm executive director of the Oregon Just Transition Alliance. I live here in Southern Willamette Valley, Eugene, Oregon. Good to be with you all today.
Great to see you, Joel. Ann Kelly.
Sorry, a little trouble getting my mute off. I'm Ann Kelly. I'm from Washington County and I work for the community planning section. I've worked on middle housing and ADU facilitation and flexible options for regulated affordable housing in our code. So I'm very excited to be part of this RAC. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. And Ariel Nelson. Let's see, Ariel.
He's not able to make it today.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think I had a note for that. Benjamin Gurwitz.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here and great to meet you all. My name is Ben Gerowitz. I'm a public policy advocate with Disability Rights Oregon, and I use he, him pronouns.
Great, thank you. And you have a strong name, Benjamin, Ben. Beth Barker Hidalgo.
Hello, everybody. Beth Barker Hidalgo, she, her. I am the director of the Curry County Homeless Coalition.
I do have a background in public transportation, 21 years, city planning with the city of Sacramento. And so that's what kind of pulled me in here. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, welcome, Beth. Brandon Persinger.
Good morning, everyone. Brandon Persinger, he, him. I am the Legislative Affairs Manager at the Association of Oregon Counties. I do natural resources and land use on behalf of Oregon's 36 counties. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, welcome, Brandon. Brian Rankin.
Good morning, folks. Brian Rankin. I manage long-range planning at the City of Bend. Pronouns he, him. And general background in a variety of kind of urbanization, UGBs, urbanization, concept planning, transportation planning, and employment opportunities analysis, all the acronyms of Oregon. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, welcome, Brian. Thank you. Brock Nation.
Morning, everyone. I'm Brock Nation. I'm the policy director at Oregon Realtors. I've been here about 2 years. You see him pronouns. Excited to start working with you all this year.
Yeah, welcome, Brock. Kasara Phipps.
Hi, everyone. Kasara Phipps. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a planner with Clean Water Services. We provide stormwater management and sewer service in Washington County.
Welcome, Kasara. Chantal Ivanso. Hopefully I said that right.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Chantal Ivenso. I use she, they pronouns. I work with Northeast Oregon Economic Development District, and I'm also on the DLCD's Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee, District 2 representative.
Welcome, Chantal. Thank you. Corey Harlan.
Good morning, everybody. Corey Harlan here. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Cities and Towns Program Director at Central Oregon Land Watch here in Bend, Oregon. And we're a land use and conservation nonprofit.
Good. Thank you, Corey. Cynthia Aguilar Arizmendi. Hopefully I didn't butcher that.
Looking at Oregon, we are contributing to a statewide movement made up of BIPOC, immigrants, refugees, people experiencing poverty, rural communities, and any marginalized or underrepresented or historically excluded communities here in the state of Oregon. Happy to be here.
Thanks. And Cynthia, you're a little gargly on the microphone, at least from my end. So, but we heard you. So thank you for being here. David Madison.
Hi, David Madison, City of Bay City. I guess I would be he, him pronouns. I've been here for a little while. I've also worked for small communities here on the coast. I represent a lot of the communities here in the committee on the coast, especially those in Tillamook County, which is fastened by Senate Bill 406. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Welcome. Alyssa Gertler.
Hi there, I'm Alyssa Gertler. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the housing manager at Clatsop County on the North Oregon coast, including the cities of Astoria, Warrenton, Gearhart, Seaside, and Cannon Beach, as well as unincorporated Clatsop County. I've worked in planning and development in the Portland metro area at the city, county, and regional government level, and I'm excited to be part of this.
Yeah, excited to have you. Thank you. Garrett Pryor.
Yeah, howdy all. My name is Garrett Pryor, he, him pronouns. I'm the board co-chair of the Wilsonville Alliance for Inclusive Community. We're a small organization, but are working on the housing advocacy part to establish that pipeline of services that can be used as a model for suburban cities around the state. And like Alan said, I've been kind of tracking the RHNA, OHNA, all that stuff since about 5 years ago. So glad to be continued a part of the process.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. And Garrett number 2, Garrett S. Garrett Stevenson.
Good morning, everyone. Garrett Stevenson, he, him. I am a land use lawyer with Schwab, Williamson, and Wyatt. And probably the largest part of my practice is representing home builders and developers who are building housing. I've been involved with Portland Metro HBA, which is now the HBA of Greater Portland, and I'm a board member of Proud Ground, which is the largest community land trust in the state. So this is kind of an unusual forum for me. Usually I'm at local government hearings in LUBA, so I'm really excited about learning about these new rules and maybe having some input into the rulemaking, and also getting to meet all of you.
Thanks, Gary. We welcome you into this space, my friend. Thank you. Holly?
I'm Holly Kearns. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the planning director for Baker City and Baker County, and I'm just happy to see everybody.
Thank you. Welcome, Holly. Jessica Blakely?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Blakely, she, her, and I'm the Director of Development for the City of Salem Housing Authority. Been doing operations and development of multifamily for about 23 years now.
Thank you, Jessica. Julia Metz?
Hey everyone, Julia Metz, she, her pronouns. I am housed in Sightline, also working in partnership with Thousand Friends of Oregon, and also coming to this space with background as an affordable housing developer. So excited to be here. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Julia. Kathy Wild?
Hi, I'm Kathy Wild. I thought I'm missing. It's not working. Okay. Anyway, I am here. I am on the board of Housing Land Advocates. I have a history as a civil rights attorney, both in Atlanta and here. I've worked a lot on housing, especially for people of color, and I've also worked at Disability Rights Oregon, and worked on the housing capacity work group.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Welcome. Kelly Hart?
My name is Kelly Hart. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Lebanon. I use she, her pronouns. And I have been a land use planner by trade for almost 17 years, and I'm excited to be part of the solutions. Glad to be here.
Part of the solution. I love it, Kelly. Thank you. Kim McCarty, been a long time, my friend. Good to see you.
Good morning, everyone. It's Kim McCarty, she, her pronouns. Really happy to be here. I'm the Executive Director for the Community Alliance of Tenants, statewide advocacy organization advocating for low-income tenant rights. And of course, we want affordable housing and accessible housing everywhere in the state. Really happy to be part of this committee. Hi, Ben.
All right, thanks, Kim. Lindsay Hutchinson?
Hi, I'm Lindsay Hutchison. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the staff attorney for Willamette Riverkeeper. And our work extends throughout the Willamette Basin, so covers most major cities in Oregon. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. Matt Cunningham?
Hi, everyone. I am Mac Cunningham. I use he, him pronouns. I'm on the housing development team at Community Partners for Affordable Housing and also on the board at Rose Community Development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mac. Mary Kyle McCurdy?
Hi, I'm Mary Kyle McCurdy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Deputy Director of 1000 Friends of Oregon, a statewide nonprofit organization focused on Oregon's land use planning program, including housing.
Thank you. Maxine Fitzpatrick?
Not seeing Maxine in the room today.
I didn't either. Yeah, thank you for that. Mercedes? We get enough, there's a lot of each other, huh?
Hello, everybody. Mercedes Elizalde. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Advocacy at Latino Network. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Mercedes. Miranda, I won't ruin your last name, Miranda.
Thanks, Ben. It's Miranda Bateshell. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the planning director for the city of Wilsonville. I also have a background in regional planning here in the metro region, and also for nonprofit houseless services, legal advocacy work for those that are houseless or at risk of becoming houseless.
Great. Well, thank you for teaching me how to say the name. Appreciate it. Morgan Greenwood.
Good morning, Morgan Greenwood, Director of Government Affairs with Central Oregon Builders Association. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome, Morgan. Patricia Diefendorfer.
Good morning, everyone. Patricia Diefendorfer, she, her pronouns. I'm the chief planner in the city of Portland in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, overseeing our long-range land use planning work here in the city. I am a longtime city planner, but relatively new on the scene here in Portland and in Oregon. So this is my first time being part of a rulemaking process here in the state of Oregon. Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, Patricia. Rachel Mori-Bidu.
You got it. Yeah, I'm Rachel Mori-Bidu. I'm a senior relationship manager at Network for Oregon Affordable Housing, which is a not-for-profit affordable housing finance provider that works throughout Oregon. I am also, while I am not representing the county, I am on the Washington County Planning Commission. And I'm really looking forward to being here. I just wanted to also add that I have a little one at home that's recovering from pneumonia, so I'm going to be off camera. Oh, and I use she, her pronouns. Sorry about that.
Sending healing vibes to the little one. That's a tough place to be as a young child. I don't think we have Samantha there with the Home Building Association, so we'll welcome Samantha at our next meeting, hopefully. Sean Hobbs Waters.
Hi, my name is Sean Hobbs Waters. I use he, him pronouns. I am 17 years old. I am a student. I'm not with an organization. I'm just here representing myself. My goal is to represent youth voices because I feel like in these conversations, youth voices are definitely underrepresented. And as we're having conversations about addressing this crisis, I feel like what often gets lost is like having that long range foresight. And so a lot of these decisions that we're going to be making in this space is going to affect my generation, further down the road. And I want to make sure that the decisions that are made within with future generations in mind.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Welcome. We're excited to have you, and we won't make you speak for all young people, but appreciate the voice that you're bringing in. Shane Henry, I won't. Shane, it's just Shane.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you. My name was just unfortunately recorded incorrectly. It's just Shane Kwiatkowski. Thank you. My pronouns are she and they. I've been a board member for Portland Neighbors Welcome, which is a grassroots nonprofit housing advocacy focusing on tenants' rights and also housing production regional state level. No longer a board member, but currently a liaison for Portland Neighbors Welcome with the LGBTQIA2S+ housing collaborative. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Shannon. And thank you for the correction. We will make that mistake again. Shannon, Bill Howard.
Good morning, Shannon Billhauer. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity of Oregon. Also, I currently serve as a board member of Housing Oregon, and I was fortunate to participate in the middle housing rulemaking process.
Good to see you again, Shannon. Ted Reed.
Good morning, Ted Reed. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a principal regional planner with Metro in Greater Portland. Project manager for our region's urban growth management decisions. So glad to work on how we can improve our work, both in our region and statewide.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Welcome. Tara Wilcoxon.
Yeah, that's correct. Good morning, everybody. I am Tara Wilcoxon. I'm the Comprehensive Planning Manager with the City of Gresham. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm pleased to be here.
Thank you. Victor Saldana.
Good morning, Victor Saldana. I use he, him pronouns. I was a previous planning commissioner, current MTAC member, and board chair for Vienna Star, which is an affordable housing nonprofit in Washington County.
Right. Thank you. Welcome. Becky Baxter.
Good morning. I'm Becky Baxter. I work for Business Oregon, which is the state's economic development agency. I manage the Special Public Works Fund, which actually has been doing some work with municipalities in the state to provide loan funding for all sorts of infrastructure, but we've been lately doing more of housing infrastructure up to the private property where the houses will be built. So I'm excited to be here. I've also been a real estate agent, a property manager. So housing, I used to work at Oregon Housing and Community Services as well. So this is kind of up my alley. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Welcome, Becky.
Thanks.
Yep. Dana Hicks. No, Dana. Okay. Jim Johnson.
Hello, everyone. Jim Johnson, he, him.
I'm the Land Use and Water Planning Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Prior to that, had a stint at DLCD, the Columbia River Gorge Commission, and then I was in local government out in the gorge with Wasco County. And thank you for including me.
Yeah, and I should note, so you all might have recognized we went from alphabetical to non-alphabetical. So the folks that Becky, Dana, and Jim, who just introduced themselves, are ex officio members for the RAC and connected to state agencies as well. So is it Callie or Cully? Callie Glenn? Okay. Oregon Health Authority. Lucia Ramirez.
Hello, I'm Lucia Ramirez. I'm a principal planner with ODOT's statewide transportation planning unit. And since transportation serves land use and housing, I've been participating for ODOT in transportation and housing rulemakings. And that will help us continue to serve land use planning goals in the future.
Great, thanks, Lucia. Megan Bolton.
I'm actually filling in for Megan Bolton today. I'm the housing economist over at OHCS. Megan is our director of research and will be here next time. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for filling in, Brandon. Is it Ryan or Ryan?
Ryan Huff. Thanks, Ben. Good morning, everyone. He, him pronouns. I'm DEQ's legislative and policy analyst. Happy to be representing our agency here and serving as a resource to this RAC. Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. Richard Rogers.
Richard Rogers with Oregon Building Codes Division. We adopt all the building codes for the state, have oversight of all local programs. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm glad to be here.
Great, thanks. And I think we had Samantha there join since we got to the S's.
Hi, sorry, I am on late today. Samantha Bear, attorney for the Oregon Home Builders Association.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Samantha. Did I miss anybody? Okay. I have a note that Michael Rock. Michael, are you in the audience?
Oh, yes. Hello. Yeah, I'm actually just a backup to Lucia Ramirez. So my name is Michael Rock. I manage ODOT's transportation planning group. So Lucia explained our role and I'll be her backup. So I wanted to listen into this first meeting. He, him pronouns. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now have we missed anybody? Okay, great. Well, thank you. I'm feeling all kinds of feelings with all the expertise and wisdom in the room, and hopefully, as we'll continue to kind of build more opportunities to get to know each other. As I mentioned earlier, there's a link in the chat to a Menti board. We're going to take a 10-minute break here in a minute, but as we're going into that break, if you all could click on that and respond to the question, we're going to use that to come back. And again, this is part of the socializing, I guess, that will be happening is, with 40 folks around the table. I'll say that again, 40 folks around the table in a virtual setting. We're going to have to find multiple ways to ensure that everyone can contribute to all the different conversations we're going to be having as we go through this as the commissioner said, this relay race together. So I'll ask folks to do that. It's 9:50. If we could come back at 10 o'clock on the dot, you'll learn that it'll be cameras on or thumbs up, some mechanism to let me know you're back. But let's come back in 10 minutes and then we'll keep going. Thanks, everybody.
you're screen sharing your email.
Yeah, I'm starting to see some faces merging back onto the screen. Welcome, folks, as we start up again. So if RAC members can give me a thumbs up, hands up, on screen, some indication to let me know that you can hear me and you're ready to keep going. Okay. And good number. Okay. So I think what we're going to do, I'm going to pass it to some colleagues for DLCD. I think, Sean, we're going to start with you. We're going to get a briefing on legislative context and direction. And then we're going to come back to the word cloud shortly before we then open up for some conversation. Again, a part of our foundational grounding as we go through the process. So Sean, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. And hi, everybody. I've introduced myself previously, but just in case, we had a lot of introductions. So again, Sean Edging, Housing Planner at DLCD. So I just wanted to set up really quickly some just brief legislative context. In the forthcoming meeting, we'll go into a lot of details about this bill, about Goal 10, how we implement Goal 10, what's changing. right? But for now, I really wanted to set this up just by answering a question: why are we here? Why did we convene a rulemaking advisory committee, and what has the legislature kind of tasked us with doing? Just to kind of start that question, and then we can kind of move into some reflections, as Ben mentioned. But if we can move to the next slide. What our work is kind of, as Alan previously described, kind of a relay between work that we've been kind of ongoing for the last several years, really relates to how we implement a specific statewide land use planning goal, Goal 10. So for those who are unfamiliar, at DLCD and in the state of Oregon, we have kind of a broad statewide land use planning system consisting of 20 goals. One of those goals is housing, and it articulates a responsibility to plan for an abundance and diversity of housing options for our community members. And a lot of the work that we've been undergoing over the last few years has been really not evaluating that premise, that goal that we should be planning for housing production, affordability, and choice, but rather how are we doing it? What are we doing in terms of operationalizing that goal to get us towards, you know, this auspice, you know, this broader goal? And are we achieving those, right? And so that was a major question that the legislature tasked our agency with doing, that we had been kind of undergoing a series of, you know, kind of processes and conversations in the past few years to kind of get an answer towards. And, you know, I won't go into details on everything that went on in that process, but we developed a series of legislative recommendations for consideration by the Oregon legislature in 2023. If we can move to the next slide. You know, these kind of reflect a distillation of a lot of conversations that we had around the state with, you know, community members, with practitioners, with, you know, builders, with, you know, local governments, that reflect, you know, both direction that we had from the legislature on how we operationalize Goal 10, but also recognizing that if our goal here is to actually achieve better outcomes, to achieve housing production, affordability, and choice, there's a broader role that needs to happen between, you know, state and local governments that you also see reflected in these recommendations. If we can move to the next slide. What the legislature followed up with, oh, sorry, just the previous one. What the legislature followed up with was a bill that implemented most, but not all, of these recommendations. Not that to say that the other two recommendations aren't necessarily like on the minds of the legislature, but this was really focused in on the local implementation of Goal 10, and they were expressed through two bills, House Bills 2001 and 2889, in the 2023 session. And if we can move to the next slide. Really what this kind of bill, these two bills focus on is reorienting, and we'll dive into the details in our next meeting, are really about reorienting the implementation of Goal 10 on getting us closer to housing production, affordability, and choice. We'll talk a lot more about what that means in the next meeting, but for now, that's kind of the reason why that we are, you know, why this bill passed, what it's intending to do. And as part of that, the legislature gave our commission, the Land Conservation and Development Commission, some direction. If we can move to the next slide. Specifically, they gave the Land Conservation and Development Commission both the authority and direction to adopt or amend administrative rules related to housing and related to urbanization. They have kind of two different deadlines, and we'll talk about this in kind of the, you know, as we go on in this meeting, but they gave us two different deadlines for adoption of rules. One deadline being January 1st of 2025, and then another being a year later, January 1st of 2026, for things that are related to urbanization. And they also gave us direction to dive into some very specific pieces of the implementation of Goal 10 to really think through this. How do we set up a long-term system that plans for, you know, an abundance and diversity of housing options for our community members? And that ranges from, and we'll talk about all of these in the future, things including how we operationalize needed housing, how we plan for housing, how we set up our strategies to promote the development of housing, how we think about, you know, land and, you know, whether or not we have sufficient land to accommodate need, and also think about the development readiness of lands, right? And, you know, this is a lot of direction that we'll talk about, you know, again, in more detail in the future. But if we can move just to the next slide. one thing I wanted to mention, and that I think will be very important for this process, is they, in addition to this kind of direction, they gave us a lot of kind of principles and priorities that LCDC must apply in kind of operationalizing this legislative direction. You know, for the sake of time and just kind of recognizing that this is a lot of text on the page, I won't dive into a lot of this, but we prepared kind of a you know, section by section summary that really tries to take some of these pieces that are in the bill and kind of provide them in a plain language format. One thing before the next meeting that I might really suggest is just kind of giving that a read and just really sitting with specifically these principles and these priorities that the legislature has kind of instilled. These are going to be a very significant North Star as we kind of delve into answering policy questions on these different pieces that the legislature has directed us to do. And, you know, they're really going to be kind of driving a lot of the considerations on how do we balance these different pieces to get us closer to our goals on production affordability and choice. And with that, you know, I think I'll pass it back over to Ben to kind of talk through maybe some of the reflections and the word cloud too.
Great, thanks. So appreciate that, Sean. So before we go into the word cloud, is there any just clarifying questions off the bat for Sean? Yeah, they tell you to wait like 8 seconds, which feels like 20 minutes when you're in a virtual space. But so thank you for that. So Ellen, if we could pull up the word cloud, there's a couple of pieces that I want to create some space for. And first, I'll just ask folks kind of this in an open-ended type of space. Hopefully everyone can see this okay. This is generated from you all. With that question of the words that describe your interest and participating in the RAC. And so just as we think about what brought each of you into this space, as you reflect a bit on what Sean just laid out in terms of the direction and kind of the guiding principles that our work will entail, just want us to sit with this for a second. And then I'm just going to ask if there's anyone that wants to give life to either what you see here or what you added, and just create some space for folks to kind of name some of what we see here and why was it so important for you, or why does it feel really important for us to hold these values, these words, these images, these outcomes as we go through our process. So I just want to create some space for folks. Feel free to raise your hand. It's a big group, so it's hard if you just come off mute. Usually we'll see you. So Mercedes, please jump in.
So one of my words was stability. And I think what I'm hopeful for in this process is that we're not going to just see maybe like a couple of years of development of housing and like maybe a couple of years of light where more people are able to get the housing that they're seeking, but that we're trying to build something that really shifts how the commodification of housing has really left so many people out, and try to shift into a mode of stability first. Because I think one thing that worries me in a lot of spaces that I'm in is that we have a lot of urgency, which is great, but we're really looking 6 months to 2 years into the future. And we're not thinking about how we can fundamentally shift some of our underlying structures and rules so that so our children's children aren't having this same meeting when they are in the middle of their career.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mercedes, right? Holding that balance of urgency with the long-term structural and systemic change for underlying issues. Let's go to, I think, Beth, then Shane, then Samantha.
Thanks, Ben. I see accessibility, which was one of the words that I added, and somehow I managed to submit that without adding the other 2 words, which were sustainability and safety and healthy, because we have a lot of older long-term rental housing stock that's not been, there's a lot of deferred maintenance. And many of our long-term rental units, especially the subsidized units, are not very healthy units for our folks. So I'd like to see healthy housing as well.
Great, thank you for naming that, holding the concept of health, safe, sustainable as we work through our process. Shane, then Samantha, then Brock.
Thank you. In general, I'm excited to see the word cloud. It reminds me of the constant balance between the words that we state and the image we want to summon. And when I look at the connections of all these different terms, I see equity as this spider in the web of everything, which is exciting, and they seem all related. And it's related to how do we use the words of our own stories to create a new image and a new world we want to be in. Then on a particular level, I put queer and trans safety for housing, just recognizing national political outcomes that are happening in relation to anti-transgender, non-conforming legislation. I just think it's important for my piece to state that Portland and Oregon and the Northwest in general has always been amenable to differences when it comes to queerness. And so I bring a sense of excitement for that and seeing how the things that I really care about are deeply connected intimately to other goals that people have. So I feel a sense of camaraderie on an existential level.
Beautiful. Thank you, Shannon. Just thank you for kind of naming the concept of safety, and particularly for queer and trans folks, and holding that as we have these conversations. Let's go, Samantha.
Hi, so I just wanted to add some context. I was on the small group that helped draft 2001 and 2889, and what strikes me about this word cloud is it's great to see that so many of the principles that we're talking about as we're excited about drafting these rules and new folks are in the conversation, is these were really the principles that guided us through the statutory construction of both bills as well. And I think for me, what I'm most excited about in participating on the RAC is we are completely retooling how we are encouraging local governments to plan for housing, to get away from just numbers, but look at this really holistic view of housing and to actually see real production and accountability. And so this word cloud is really indicative of the ultimate goals. And I think that's exciting to see.
It is exciting to see alignment, right? And that was kind of the hope here. So thanks for naming that and that kind of holistic view of what's possible and in front of us. I think it's Brock and then Alan.
Yeah, I agree with everything Sam said. I just wanted to focus in, the two of the most common words there, affordability and equity. I think it's really important that we keep both of those in mind, particularly when we're talking about home ownership. Both from an affordability standpoint, it basically provides a form of market rate housing cost control, but also, from an equity standpoint, both from racial wealth gap equity, from home ownership gap equity. It's really important that we're going to be considering those as well. So I'm glad to see that that's a priority for the group.
Yeah, thank you for naming that, Brock. Alan, jump in, please.
Yes, I really appreciate the emphasis on equity as well.
I know that the limited data that we have, especially around accessible housing.
I know there's limited data we have around, especially around accessible housing.
And I'm really hoping that we can figure out a way to overcome those limits.
And I really hope there's a way we can come to overcome those limits.
And figure out a way to for people with disabilities.
And figure out a way to include ensure equity for people with disabilities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. And again, just naming accessibility and not losing the full spectrum of humans that we're talking about. And I think it's very easy in these processes to get stuck in kind of production and analysis, and reminding us as Shane, as Alan, as others have talked about, centering the folks that are impacted and most impacted, most vulnerable in our community is going to be super important. And certainly I hear that in the ways that you all are talking about this. Shannon, jump in, please.
Thank you, Ben. Took a moment to get my cursor to cooperate. So I've worked with Habitat for Humanity in Oregon in some capacity or other, starting as a VISTA volunteer since October of 1999, because I have gotten to see firsthand time and again that having a healthy, stable, and affordable home really transforms opportunities for kids and households of all ages, right? And constructions to move from having where you live be a burden, right, to a springboard for opportunity. And how do we operationalize housing abundance, right? How do we operationalize transformational housing justice? Like this is our task, right? That we want our friends and neighbors to be able to move from like circumstances that can induce feelings of shame, right? That are actually harmful, physically harmful, to joy and opportunity. And I see these values in this word cloud that underpin that critical, I'm going to call it cultural change, which is, I want to name it, right, at odds, as mentioned earlier, to the values that got us to where we are today, which is scarcity thinking, that housing shouldn't be abundant, that it should be a privilege for certain kinds of people, and we're going to exclude opportunities structurally in our nation. That this is radical work. This is radical, critical work. And I mean, I'm hoping that the work of this group and our partners, right, at city and county levels, that we are maybe like a beacon across our nation of what can be.
Thank you, Shannon. Just there's a lot there. I mean, it's just the springboard of opportunity, right? And the radical work and visionary opportunity that we have. So thank you for naming that in the way you did, Kathy, and then Corey.
Hi. One of the things that's been incredibly frustrating to me is watching Multnomah County and the city try to deal with a homelessness issue and fail despite having lots of money from taxpayers to deal with it. And it's my hope that through this process, we can get them to a point where they have to come up with strategic ways to actually fulfill the mission for which that tax money was created. And I don't think without this process and these rules that's going to happen.
All right, thanks for naming some of the intersection around that full spectrum of housing that's so critical. Corey, and then Commissioner Lazo.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a lot of what other folks have shared around affordability and equity. And there were a few other words here that I wanted to highlight, because I think what I'm really excited about is working together to really, help urgently meet these housing needs that our communities have, and to really do that in ways that can deliver more climate resilient and equitable, complete communities. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for that intersection, and I'm really excited for that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Corey, for naming that. Commissioner, please.
Thanks, Ben. And I really appreciate this exercise up front in facilitation and really getting us to this point where we can recognize that we have shared values. I'll burst that bubble a tiny bit and go back to the 2001-2003 rulemaking, where we had a very similar exercise up front. And one of the things I felt was we sort of moved away from the shared values that we had all stated going around the room from the very beginning. And what I would say is, I don't think our values changed. I think what happened was we didn't have actually a common understanding of what these words meant to each of us. And I think we ought to recognize that while a lot of us said the words affordability or equity, we may not agree what those words actually mean or how they're defined or what levels we're setting them at. And so again, while we might have a shared value around affordability, it might mean, it might have 40 different meanings in this room. And as we're moving through this process, I would encourage us to stop when we feel like we have disagreement about something, and recognize that what we have disagreement about is actually how we're defining these values, whether that's about affordability or about equity, and take a moment to say, I think we might have we might not be connecting on what we're trying to achieve, even though it feels like we're trying to achieve the same thing. So just a reminder that it feels, at this moment, it feels like those are shared values. And as we progress, we may move further apart from those, and may take some time to make sure we we do have agreement about what those mean.
Yeah, you really bursted our love bubble here. No, it's part of you're making all the points, right? And I think it's such an important. I just want to sit with what you just said, because it is the purpose of this to start at this foundational place of, when we look at this, we're seeing a lot of really positive and potential and opportunities. And I had an old coach that had me read a book called Sitting in the Fire, right? And giving us the time and space to hold the tensions that will inevitably emerge, right? And I appreciate you just reminding us both of where we've been, right? That these values are often what we hear and what we say, and I think what we believe. But that belief might look very different. And I think as we go through this process, I'm going to keep reminding us of where we started. And I think you've challenged us as we all kind of sit with what you just described around, what is that going to mean? Because we're actually going to have to grapple with and wrestle with those definitions and turn those values into reality in a way that actually works for the state. And for all of our communities. So thank you for both holding the optimism while reminding us of the challenge. That'll be our collective opportunity together. David, and then Garrett.
Yeah, I just wanted to add. We small communities here in Tillamook County, we really appreciate and look forward to the optimism of helping. But we are strapped by Senate Bill 406. And our communities, we have our largest Tillamook at 5,000 population, but many of our smaller communities are under, the 300 population to 2,000 population or less. And we're just very concerned about the new housing needs, changing the landscape of these communities and really putting strains on our infrastructure and items like that. And so that's, I think, what we want to, we're very excited about this whole thing and really want to help, but how do we get our legs in without totally changing what we have?
Yeah, thank you, David. And you're naming a conflict, and one of the things you'll see me do, and I'm going to model it here, David, to put you on the spot, because I'm not here as the technical expert or the policy expert. I'm here as a facilitator. So can you give some context to SB 406? I think it's relatively specific to your part of the world.
Yeah, Senate Bill 406 basically requires us to meet the housing needs, just like every other community of over 10,000 population in the Valley in the rest of Oregon.
Good. Thank you, David. So just as so I use that as just not to pick on David, but as a model. You will often hear me if you reference something that may be technical, maybe legislative. I'm going to do my best to make sure that folks around this entire table are getting some additional context. So if I don't understand it, you might hear me ask you a question. I encourage others to really get in the habit of asking for clarity, asking for, can you give more information on that? I'm going to do that as a facilitator just to make sure that I'm both understanding what you're saying, but also trying to continue to remind folks that there's a variety of different levels of expertise in this room. And that's part of the way that I hope we can distribute and share power through access to information and expertise. So let's go, Garrett, and then Mayor Kyle.
Sure, and I'll just be quick. I just want to underscore everything Alan said. It stuck with me. We put equity and affordability, we use these terms and we put it on a lot of things, but it's the devil's in the details of what that means. And so I think the things that stood out to me in achieving that equity is that tension. You actually see it on the words are grouped together: stability versus advocacy. And then on the left side of the screen, balance versus change. And so if we're not leaning into those trade-offs, if we're worried too much about maybe the status quo or not being too stable or not changing, we won't achieve that central goal that we're headed after is equity. So well done, Alan.
Yeah, no, thank you, Garrett. And again, let's hold tension, right? That's going to be a big part of the way that we move through this process, is recognizing, right, these things that may feel incongruent or that we might see as holding some tension between. Let's go, Mary Kyle, and then Becky.
Thanks. I wrote affordability, equity, and climate to illustrate the intersection of those, and particularly in the location of housing, because that matters for affordable access to amenities for all and climate resiliency for all. And that's access to schools, stores, parks, services, et cetera, and climate resilient, livable neighborhoods for all that are accessible to all. So I think we can achieve that intersection. So thank you.
I appreciate that optimism and just naming some of the place-based realities that we'll be exploring. So Becky and then Joel.
Yeah, this kind of jumps off a little bit what David, I think, was kind of referring to, and what we see at the infrastructure intersection. I think there's a lot of communities across the state that want to succeed and meet housing goals. Their infrastructure can't handle one more toilet. So I hope part of this discussion becomes, how do we address that need? Because without addressing the water, the wastewater, the stormwater, that and the literally billions of dollars that will take to address, we have communities that already have housing moratoriums that in effect have housing moratoriums because they can't do anything more with what infrastructure they have. And so I hope, I'm optimistic, and I will say it many times as we're going through this process, how do we fix the infrastructure? How do we invest in the infrastructure so the housing can come? Because without that investment, we're not going to get the housing, which it's a really expensive dilemma, because to pay for that, you have to raise the rates, which causes problems for persons that are of fixed income. So anyway, I just wanted to, and I see it's like infrastructure is really small there. So I wish it to be bigger because I think it's kind of an elephant in the room that like everybody agrees we need housing, but how we get there is going to be difficult. So that's just my comment.
Well, thank you, Becky, for naming it. And there's probably a number of terms, words, phrases here that may look small now. They're going to grow exponentially in our process, and certainly the cost of infrastructure will be one of those realities. Thought I saw another. Joel, where'd you go? Thought I saw your hand.
Ben.
There you are.
Yeah, I appreciate this robust conversation. I just wanted to come in here, remind folks of a few things. I think the issue that this RAC and this legislation that we passed is trying to achieve is a problem that didn't just happen overnight. And I think that's why we have so many people here in the first place, right? We have decisions that have been made over decades that have led us to this point. And I want to just remind folks that we have had some events over the last 3 years that have compounded the systemic issues between the pandemic, extreme weather events, from wildfires to the extreme heat waves that have claimed the lives of hundreds of people across the Northwest, as well as strange weather patterns in the winter. It's literally becoming really volatile to be without housing or to be without housing that's adequate. And we're dealing with all those issues. We don't have enough housing. A lot of the housing that we have is dilapidated, and a lot of folks are at risk of losing housing. Then you compound that with the fact that there's a lot of folks who live in areas in which they don't have access to green spaces. They don't have access to walkable neighborhoods, but it doesn't have to be this way. I think that's the beauty of this legislation and what we're attempting to do, right? Is I'm sure you all saw Star Wars, right? The Death Star is like this really, really small space we have to fit into. So I'm hoping that we can all do like Star Wars did and make it through that narrow gap, right, to get to where we need to go, because there's just no other way for us to do that. We have to address this issue, and we have to balance all these competing problems to get there. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Well, the mixture of metaphor, analogy, visualization that y'all have used demonstrates the level of creativity that we have around the room. Commissioner, I don't know if that was a Star Wars, but I appreciate the emoji that you were using. I think that's a spaced invader, if my 80s references are correct. So, and while I appreciate, and I think this came up in a few different ways as we kind of transition off, I think this exercise served its point for this part of the conversation, and where you closed us, Joel, and reflected in other conversations that folks brought forward, right? That the issues that we face have been created over decades, and that the impacts that we can have influence and effect over decades. And so I think holding both of those realities is a really powerful kind of challenge and opportunity in front of us, which I'm excited to, go on this journey with you all. Any last reflections or points? I so appreciate the way that folks have shared so beautifully. Ben, jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to name one thing is that, as many people said, housing doesn't live in a isolated bubble. And I'm thinking specifically about accessibility where, it might not just be enough for someone to get housing, but to have services, whether it's access to drug treatment or mental health services or job training, where not only to get housing, but to stay in that housing and thrive. And so just naming that there's a lot of contingencies that in order to stay in this housing, to be able to really support people where they're at and offer the systems in place to make people be successful.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, for naming that. Samantha?
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing. I'll take my turn to be the bubble popper now. Many of us sit on numerous racks with this agency, have sat with numerous racks before. And I think two things stand out to me: that while we can have shared goals and we can have great ideal goals, that often doesn't translate to reality when it comes to zoning ordinances, comprehensive plan changes, building permits, and then the actual building of housing. And so I just caution that throughout this rack, and you will hear this from me, I'll just tell everyone now, that while we may agree on a certain direction or a certain objective, we also have to be practicable, and we have to understand how when down the road, when we put these rules into effect, what that really means. And we have to balance equities, because sometimes what might work for climate isn't going to work for accessibility or is not going to work for affordability. And as much as these amazing ideals converge, they can also conflict. And so I think we just need to commit to honest and transparent and objective conversation when we get to the practical effects of things, so that we are creating rules that actually work. And then on that point, at the end of the day, it is going to be upon our local government partners to implement these at the local level. And so when we are drafting these rules, we have to listen to them. They have to work. They have to make sense. They need to be clear and objective. Because if we overburden our local government partners with rules that they simply cannot implement, we're not achieving the objectives of OHNA. And so again, that is also something I just want to say you'll hear a lot from me on this rack as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for previewing a refrain that may come. And again, I'd like to think that this is not a naive group, right? And that part of our opportunity and part of our role as a facilitation and support team around you all is to ensure that we are having those conversations filtered both through values, filtered through practical application, filtered through kind of the lens of like, what does this look like on the ground? And it will be, I love starting with this place, right? Even though y'all are trying to bust it up a little bit as we go through this process, but starting at a place that says our direction is clear. Right, what we are charged with, what we are responding to, the crisis that we are collectively experiencing. I believe that we're all sharing in that understanding, and not to be naive to say that, well, that means that we're all going to agree going forward. And so part of what I want to, hold and remind us is where we started right now, right? Hopefully as a strong foundation for the things that we'll want to make sure that we don't lose as we go through this process. So that'll be, our collective challenge, and certainly a design challenge for how we make sure we don't lose those pieces and, force, folks to keep, saying the same thing over and over again. But we've designed it in such a way where these issues will emerge because of the way we've structured conversations. Let's go Anne and then Mercedes.
Thank you.
Anne's
thank
hand.
you very much.
Hand.
Yeah, I kind of was waiting till the end. I put the word people in there because there were just so many related topics that I wanted to cover, but I was so happy to see all the human elements that were brought forward and the words that people chose. And for me, people are really at the heart of this. I too am concerned about infrastructure, but infrastructure is a very broad term that means different things to different people. And infrastructure is also impacted by people being unhoused or inadequately housed in large numbers. So in my opinion, I feel a real need to decide, what issues are most critical and need a triage approach. And then how we can approach certain other issues through alternative measures so that we can best meet the critical need.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. For maybe we'll close this part of the conversation on that note, right? That as we go through this process, balancing kind of the legal, technical, right, the kind of aspects of that, the practical, but not losing sight of housing and humanity, if that's the way to say it. And sorry, I wasn't meaning to call on you, Mercedes. You just ended up, Anne's hand showed up right above your face, so I was like, I got confused. So I'm gonna move us. So thank you for that conversation. And again, it was a hope to ground us in some sharing of the values, the alignment with the legislative direction, right? So we know what the charge is, and it's going to be our collective challenge to try to figure out how do we actualize that and make it into a vision and into a reality that actually starts solving our problems. And hopefully, gets over some of the humps that we've been reminded of that have created barriers to making real progress aligned with all these values. So moving to our next part of the agenda, I think I'm passing it to you, Ethan. We're going to move into a decision-making process. And Ethan, I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Ben. And I just want to thank you all for the conversation that we had in that previous agenda item. I thought that was really enlightening and a good baseline for the conversation that we'll have through the rest of this meeting today. So just really wanted to thank you for that conversation. And if that's any indication of how this process is going to be going, I'm really looking forward to that, engaging with you all in that process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just how this rulemaking process works. We have some folks who are familiar with this process, some folks who are first timers. And so just kind of setting that baseline and kind of making sure everybody's on the same page of really how a rulemaking and a rulemaking advisory committee process kind of unfolds. So, we've heard a lot about stakeholders and guidance and direction and principles and collaboration and all of this kind of stuff throughout this meeting. But, how do all of those pieces fit together, and how does this group and the DLCD project team kind of make decisions is what we're here to talk about in this agenda item. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to pull up a graphic, a diagram that shows our best attempt at trying to illustrate how this rulemaking process, decision making is kind of unfolding. And so, you don't have to kind of read through this all right now. I wanted to kind of point out that this diagram is in your packet. It's in the operating principles document, which is packet item number 2, if you wanted to take a look either now or later. But from a baseline perspective. Rulemaking is a role that state agencies play to operationalize state legislation or regulations, right? So, the state legislature sets the policy direction, and the role of state agencies is to take that direction and fill in the gaps, fill in the technical implementation details of that direction. So often the legislature does this by directing a state agency or a state commission to adopt rules. And LCDC in this case directs then DLCD staff to inform or make recommendations on how those rules could be adopted. And then we as staff, as DLCD staff, work with a rulemaking advisory committee or technical advisory committees, you all in this room, to advise us and inform our recommendations to the Land Conservation and Development Commission. So at the end of the day, in terms of this rulemaking process, the Land Conservation and Development Commission is the final ultimate decision maker in this process. They will adopt the rules that we as DLCD recommend to them, but all of those rules, the exact language of those rules, is informed by this advisory committee process. So kind of using that as the launching point here, technical and rulemaking advisory committees are advisory to DLCD staff. We are going to make our best effort to respond to the issues that you raise in this process and work with you to work through both the really philosophical policy questions in front of us, but then also work with you and the technical advisory committees to work through the really sticky, in the weeds technical elements of implementation of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis and House Bill 2001 and 2889. So there's a lot of arrows on this diagram here, and I think that kind of shows, the iterative and collaborative kind of process that a rulemaking really is. There's going to be conversations that the Rulemaking Advisory Committee is having on broader policy direction and implementing things like a rulemaking charge, or kind of setting the direction to implement the LCDC's rulemaking charge, to implement sections 8 and 9 of House Bill 2001, to set the rulemaking or the technical advisory committees kind of on a direction to dive in and do that kind of deep in the weeds work. But that process goes back and forth, right? The Rulemaking Advisory Committee eventually down the line is going to be having conversations about the work that's happening in the Technical Advisory Committee. And the Technical Advisory Committee is going to be using your direction and your conversations on kind of high-level policy themes to advance, those kind of policy options, go down the rabbit holes, find the ways that are going to be, meeting all of these values that we've described earlier in this meeting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those roles a little bit later, but I think this process here that's on the screen kind of is our best attempt at describing how this process works. There's a lot of back and forth, and we will continually go back to this process and in this direction to make sure that we're operating and using these kind of policies and direction as our North Star in this process. If we could go to the next slide. So if LCDC is the final decision maker, what are they expecting? What is their direction? What is their guidance to DLCD staff and to you all as rulemaking advisory committee members to bring to them in terms of recommendation in order for them to adopt rules that are responsive to both our direction, our crises, and our values? So this is the charge. This is not the full charge, and I'm not going to read through this. It's included in your packet, again, in that operating principles document, packet item number 2, if you want to take a look at the actual language. For brevity, we've kind of shortened these up, but the key values that I think have been articulated in the early part of this meeting, you can see those here, right? Safe, accessible, climate resilient, affordable housing options that affirmatively further fair housing. Thinking about how we can do that and support local governments in the implementation of housing production strategies in the Goal 10 planning process. Providing clarity, certainty, providing support to those local governments as they are going through these processes. And then thinking through how do we hold both ourselves as a state, but then individuals as accountable to those goals? How do we hold those goals still as the guiding star, even as we're talking about implementation, zoning codes, comprehensive plans? Those goals should be seen through those processes, and how do we hold ourselves accountable to that? So we can go to the next slide. So that's the rulemaking charge. And like I kind of mentioned, that sets the expectations for us as a rulemaking advisory committee and us as a department project team. There's also an articulation of expectations from LCDC directly to the department staff through what's titled the Land Conservation Development Equitable Decision-Making Framework. So this is a framework that LCDC, the commission, adopted earlier this year, which articulates the commission's expectations to DLCD staff and how we are making recommendations in terms of implementing a new program, adopting rules, making recommendations on rules. And these are things, specific considerations that DLCD staff should take into consideration in those decision-making processes. And so this framework is really going to be important as DLCD staff is working with Rulemaking Advisory Committee members to ensure that we are holding these elements, these categories of equitable decision-making at the forefront of our decision-making process. Things like, how are the rules that we are proposing going to be addressing historical inequities? How do these rules benefit or burden certain priority populations? How are we thinking about engagement? How are we thinking about accountability? These are important elements of our DLCD process, as we are going to be taking what you all are having a conversation about and articulating those into draft rules for your review and for future conversation. So we're funneling those goals, values, priorities from both the legislature, LCDC, from this group that we've talked about today, through this equitable decision-making framework. And so I just want to really kind of highlight that for you all to give you a sense of how we as DLCD staff are going to be operating in this process and the things that our commission is really expecting of you, me, and the rest of the team in this rulemaking process. So I will pause there, Ben, and see if there's any questions just about that kind of premise. And happy to engage in a conversation with RAC members on that.
Yeah, thanks. So why don't we open it up for any questions folks have, either around the kind of image that Ethan started with in terms of the decision-making structure and all the arrows and role and relationships between the different bodies, the charge or the equity framework. Is there any questions, thoughts, reflections, concerns, considerations? Shane, jump in.
Thank you so much. Sorry if this is a really silly question, but can you explicate the difference between DLCD and LCDC? Because they seem nebulous to me right now, and I just want to understand the differences between them.
No silly questions. All questions are good questions, so please ask them. You're probably not the only one wondering. Ethan, jump in.
100% agree, Ben. Yeah, thanks, Shane, for the question. So DLCD, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, is the staff, the state agency staff that are working to support the land conservation development in the implementation of the Oregon statewide planning goals. The Land Conservation and Development Commission is a group of commissioners who are the ultimate decision maker in terms of the implementation and the amendments and
I apologize.
Underlying.
You said a group of, what was the term? My computer cut out.
Sorry, commissioners or appointed members from across the state. Yeah, so LCDC equals the Land Conservation and Development Commission. That's our, appointed board. That is our leaders at the state Department of Land Conservation and Development, which is the staff, the professional staff.
And you heard from Commissioner Lazo earlier, who's going to be the liaison to the LCDC to this rulemaking body. Alan, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And Shane, thanks for the question. Because they made the initials so similar, it's really confusing. So I'm not sure who was in charge of that, but It is one of the things that makes that confusing. The other thing I'll say about the role, for me anyway, of LCDC is, we sort of work up from a upside down pyramid. We're not only balancing the production, affordability, and choice pieces around housing and goal 10 here, but at the higher level for both the agency and the commission, we're also balancing all the goals. So housing goal 10 is one of 19 goals, which also competes with and works with all the other goals around natural resources, urbanization, all those pieces. And so there's another level of balance that we have to look at when we're talking specifically about housing. And so one of the things that I've really learned in my time as a commissioner is the role that DLCD plays in balancing all of those elements in our state. And many of those interests are represented here, and some of them aren't. And so we always have to stay aware that there's a even bigger context out there that we're working with.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, and while they do rock, LCDC is not to be confused by ACDC as well. So.
Yes, thank you for that levity. For those about to rock, as they say, right? Other questions? I really do want to make sure folks really understand the role and relationship between the technical advisory committees. And I know I think there's a few folks that are both on the RAC and the tax technical advisory committees, rules advisory committees. Are folks clear with that relationship, how that flows and is influenced by kind of the right side of that slide? That includes kind of the consultant teams and the staffing teams and the governor's office, and then ultimately to the decision-making body. Jessica, jump in.
Hi, thank you. So I did express interest in that, but didn't receive any notification. So I'm wondering has that happened or did I miss something?
Really good question.
The TAC assignments.
Good question, Jessica. So yes, we are just about to finalize the technical advisory committee roster. So those folks who have been invited to participate have been notified, and we'll be publishing the final rosters potentially by the end of this week for the technical advisory committees. I'll get into talking about kind of the roles of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee and the technical advisory committees and how that relationship exists in just a moment. But for a little bit of a teaser, really the Rulemaking Advisory Committees are focused on advising DLCD on broader high-level policy direction in terms of the conversations that we are having about how we can make good on the House Bill 2001 principles, goals, and the LCDC charge. The technical advisory committees are very technical. They're in the weeds. They're talking about draft rules, about wordsmithing, about implementation of, how this is actually going to work. But there's a inherent relationship between those two bodies because you have to have both the policy and the technical implementation conversation. So there'll be lots of back and forth and bouncing between the tax and the RAC throughout this process.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. And just as a structural aside, I know Deb Myhoff, Communitas, introduced herself early in this process, as well as the Echo Northwest partners who, so we'll be coordinating as well as consultant teams surrounding and supporting this process. Deb, did you want to add anything? Okay.
No, thank you.
A face to the name. All right, thank you. So just know that, right, that's going to be something that we're going to be actively and consistently working to ensure that there's I'll say seamless, although that may be naive, but as much of a seamless process as possible to make sure that the work that's coming out of that policy direction that Ethan just described is informing the tax, and the work that the tax are doing and that real technical and wordsmithing, as Ethan was just saying, is coming back to us, right? So there's really this really strong relationship between kind of the technical work and the kind of policy direction work. Other thoughts, questions for the equity framework? I don't know, Anita, I know you've worked in that arena. I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add connecting to those 8 kind of points in the equity framework?
Just a short kind of description is I did work with the DLCD staff and also the Commission LCDC to create this, but it was also under the governor's kind of mandate to do this type of work as well. So there's a lot of support for this, and I'm here to really help work this through the rules. And I think, as folks said, is how this can be implemented at the local level. Like I said, I've got many years of doing local level development as city and community development, and also working for Housing Authority of Portland. So I'm really here to support it on all levels.
Yeah, thanks, Anita, and super excited to have that background that you bring. As I said at the beginning, how do we embed that framework? How do we embed kind of equitable analysis and considerations as we do this work? And having the expertise of someone who's actualized this on the ground, but also brings this higher level understanding of the values and principles of equity and equity analysis and considerations will be a really important part of our process. Thanks, Anita. So again, opening up other questions. Just want to make sure folks are really understanding kind of your role and relationship in the broader scheme, and then kind of some of the values that we are kind of responsible for providing policy direction around as this work unfolds. It's been such a great job, Ethan. I guess people are feeling foundationally strong. So I mean, this won't be the last time that you have the chance to ask questions, right? As we actually get into the work and you see kind of the ways that the work unfolds, certainly we'll continue to create space if folks are like, I'm not understanding this connection. We said this, they're saying that. Why isn't it aligned? How do we align better? There'll be numerous opportunities to make sure that we're checking this diagram and those arrows and making those arrows real and meaningful as they weave in and out of each other. Well,
Yeah,
even
Ben.
the timeline and deadlines and
Yeah, I think that's a good transition to this next piece, which is talking a little bit more deeply about the operating principles and kind of more about those roles, responsibilities, expectations of this group and how we are planning to work together throughout this really the next 2 years. So if we could go to the next slide. So this is something we've already kind of talked about a little bit, but it's kind of good to see it distinct. You'll see a lot of the same words here between the RAC and the TAC. There is, like I've mentioned, that relationship between these two, or really 2 categories of advisory committees. Like we've mentioned, the primary difference between these advisory committees is that the Rulemaking Advisory Committee is focusing on policy, bigger conversations, theories on how we can do this, rather than the technical implementation, nuts and bolts of that implementation, which is the role of the technical advisory committees. And the kind of part of the rationale for having this kind of setup is we are, like has been mentioned in the beginning, we are tasked with something that is big, right? A systemic long-term change to an existing process that has been around for 50 years at this point. And to have both the bigger policy conversation and the technical implementation all in one advisory committee is just too big of a task. And so we'll seek to use your expertise in this Rulemaking Advisory Committee to really guide and support and advance the work of the technical advisory committees as they're going through their process, considering options on how to implement, these various elements of this work, and continuing to kind of bounce those ideas back and forth between the RACs and the RAC and the TACs. So if we could go to the next slide, this will kind of describe the timeline in which we're, the roles and responsibilities and expectations. So, this is included in the operating principles document, which articulates some baseline expectations of how to engage in this advisory committee process. First and foremost, our expectation and of you all is that you're coming into this space in good faith, right? You're considering the viewpoints of other participants, and you're going to be presenting yourself in a respectful manner in order to get to the collaboration that we've all kind of talked about in this meeting. And that requires us to be open to those conversations and other viewpoints, and really using those kind of North Star principles that we've talked about and holding those close throughout this process. The other expectation, we'll talk about the timeline in just a little bit, but we have what seems like long-term process, but is actually, when we kind of peel back the layers, is actually a relatively short amount of time to get this work done. So our expectation is that you're coming to these meetings prepared, ready to have a conversation, ready to provide your input during these rulemaking advisory committee meetings. And then finally, to ask for assistance when you need it. We are here as DLCD staff and the project team to support you in this process. Some of you are new to this rulemaking process, and we really want to make sure that you are feeling comfortable, prepared to engage fully in this process. We've got some ground rules here that I'm not going to go through every single one, but kind of one that I want to point to at the end of this process suggestions is I will personally make an ask to you all to hold DLCD staff and the project team and each other accountable to the legislative intent, the rulemaking charge, and the goals that we've talked about through this meeting. So really kind of elevating what Commissioner Lasso has mentioned earlier in this meeting about coming back to those principles throughout this process and ensuring that we're adopting rules and making recommendations that are truly implementing those broad principles. So I'll stop there, and I think there's an ask for a break. Ben, do I have that right?
Yeah. So so why don't we take a break? Let's leave this on the slide or leave this on the screen while folks break. Let's just take 5 minutes. Give you a little stretch, walk around. Fulfill your human needs, or however the expression might be. So let's take 7 minutes. We have some time. So let's come back at 11:10. And what I'll ask is when we come back, we'll spend a little bit of time just making sure we understand if there's anything additional that we need to share as expectations, and then we'll kind of move into the next parts and towards our closing. So let's come back at 11:10. And we'll see you in 6 minutes. We're at 11:10. As hopefully you'll be accustomed to seeing beautiful faces, hands up, clap, emoji, something. Let me know you're back. And lots of thumbs ups. Okie dokie. All right, so Ethan had just walked through, and this is an important piece, and one that is really foundational to the way we're going to operate. And I do want to create some space for a couple kind of pieces. One, is there any questions for clarity on what Ethan's laid out? You can kind of see the responsibilities, expectations around preparation, engaging. I will name that we've had, I've received a question around getting materials both after meetings, so PowerPoint presentations. I think, Ethan, we can commit to sending anything that we use in the meeting out, and we'll post it publicly as well. And then I know that, as folks probably can imagine, we'll have as much grace as possible, but certainly committed to sharing materials as much as we can in advance of meetings. So I did want to confirm that. Garrett, you had a hand up. Jump in.
Yeah, maybe a question about process. Just Ben, either yourself or from the team, about just capturing our input, like minority, majority opinions. Like I very likely, and I don't want to go down like a voting path, but just thoughts from y'all on how that's going to be captured, communicated, when we would see that, when or if it would go to LCDC. Would love to hear.
Yeah, so I mean, Ethan, I'll probably come back to you. I mean, I think there'll be critical times in this process where we'll want to at least assess levels of agreement. I will say, just structurally, we are creating meeting summaries for all of our conversations. So what captured in meetings will certainly be reflected back publicly. And obviously, this is an advisory body, not a decision-making body. But Ethan, do you want to speak to when and how we're imagining capturing kind of levels of agreement, minority opinions, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And Ben, I think you touched on kind of that most important part right there at the end, which is that the Rulemaking Advisory Committee and the Technical Advisory Committees are not voting bodies or decision-making bodies, and your role is to be advisory to DLCD staff and to LCDC, so that we can make informed decisions. Now, granted, that is going to be there's going to be moments in this process. Let's just kind of call that out, that there's going to be disagreement on how we should proceed in a particular issue. And I think our role as DLCD staff is to ensure that we are taking in that input and kind of that discussion and debate, and thinking through, our decision-making framework, thinking through the goals, thinking through the legislative intent, and making a recommendation from that conversation to LCDC. So we're not asking you all to get to consensus. Obviously, that would be great, but it's not a consensus or unanimous kind of approach here.
Yeah, that's helpful, Ethan. And Ben, I appreciate the question, right? Because if you're thinking about kind of some of the role, it's not just the kind of the end result, right, LCDC, but it's that interaction with the tax. And so being able to give policy direction, right, to the tax is going to be a really important part of the RAC's Rulemaking Advisory Committee's responsibility. And so, I won't land on an answer today, but Ben, I think we'll come back to that maybe in our next conversation. I mean, it can be as simple as just, thumbs up to assess levels of agreement, making sure that as we're giving direction to the tax to really say, here's the things that the RAC was grappling with, right? So we had a lot of agreement in this arena. There's a lot of disagreement here. So as it goes to the tax and they grapple with kind of what we're struggling with, and as it comes back, we can kind of figure that out. So it's not clearly kind of outlined to your question in the kind of roles and responsibilities as kind of how we make decisions as a group, or assess agreement is probably the way to say it, because we do, to Ethan's point, we don't have to come to consensus and we are advisory. Commissioner?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, the other piece I'll remind folks of is that the rulemaking and the adoption of the rules process at the commission at LCDC is a public process, and so we will be taking public input when the rules go before the commission at different points, and so there will continue to be opportunities to express those opinions if they have been captured or if they haven't been captured. So there will be further opportunities at the commission level.
Yeah, that's a helpful reminder if folks haven't been part of RAC processes. Like we go through all this work, and then there's a space and time for public input, public comment that's kind of formally done before LCDC ultimately is charged with that kind of finalization. So just as a reminder, right, like the work we're doing is contributing, but there's a lot of other voices and a lot of other work and a lot of other politics that will be overlaid upon all the work that you all do. So thanks for that. That's a great reminder. And I appreciate the question, Ben. I think we should come back to that because I do think it'll be important, particularly for the technical advisory committees to really understand, is this kind of consensus direction or, are there things that we're still kind of having tension around or really want to represent authentically in terms of differences of direction or opinion. Ethan?
Yeah, if I could, I think Alan, Commissioner Lazo raised a really good point, which is, through that LCDC, the Land Conservation Development Commission's decision-making process, I think DLCD staff would be not doing our job if we did not inform those recommendations and highlight the areas of disagreement in this body and in the technical advisory committees to the land conservation development, who are the ultimate decision makers. They need to know those kinds of, where there's disagreement and where there's policy options and where there's, momentum in certain directions. And so we will, as DLCD staff, will be providing any kind of written comments and meeting summaries and all of that kind of conversation history to LCDC throughout this process to inform that their decisions.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. And I do hope, even though I know we started with an idea of kind of shared kind of values and vision, that each one of you feels empowered, even if in the minority, to name what you need to name. And, to the extent that we can keep cultivating a culture around this RAC where folks feel that they have that agency, even if you're the only one in the room, right? And really giving permission and giving honor and respect to differences of opinion is going to be really important. And so I can't force that upon y'all. All I can do is try to create and cultivate a culture and a space where folks feel like we have many mechanisms, either verbally, through surveys, through jam boards, whatever the mechanism is. So we're capturing all the different perspectives around this table and authentically and transparently reflecting that both to each other, but also, and more importantly, to folks outside of the room. Great. Thank you for that question, Ben. Let's pull up the roles and responsibilities again, if we could, just to have the imagery. Because again, I do want to make sure folks are clear on kind of the expectations that you have. And then the fundamental question that I often ask, is there anything missing here? I think this is one of those moments where maybe it's courageous or maybe it's selfish, whatever the words are. Is there anything that you're not seeing in terms of, honoring the agenda, balancing and taking our turns speaking, some of the values and commitments that I laid out at the beginning around ensuring that we're really lifting up voices around this table, naming things early and often, as my principal here in Portland says, we're going to be hard on process, soft on people, right? Addressing issues and questions, not attacking each other, listening to understand. We can debate, but we're going to capture all information. We don't have to come to agreement. Is there anything missing that would help for you to more fully participate? Anything we need to name? Is there any questions around language? I mean, I think we've had this point before. Affordability was one example that was lifted. Good faith, do folks have a shared? We think we all know what that means. Are folks okay with we're operating in good faith? We're bringing things into this process. I often say, please don't run around this process. A lot of people have access to other levers of power. I want you to bring it into this room. As I'll promise, if things, we will use mechanisms like surveys. If there's things that come up for you, one, feel free to reach out to me directly, or your DLCD leads. But also, we'll keep revisiting these as we need to make sure that folks, if either we're observing dynamics that aren't being productive and constructive, or we feel like we need to make iterative changes as we go through the process, we're totally committed to that. So I won't say last call, I'll say call for the moment. Any needs or process improvement suggestions or language that would better represent and reflect what will work best for you. Yeah, Shane, jump in, please.
The one thing that I'm confused about is when it says avoid surprises, because do you bring a cake with candles on the Zoom? Like, I'm sorry, I just don't understand what that means.
Yeah, Ethan, you want to give a little life?
If you want to bring me a cake, Shane, I'm all for it. But I think, for the most part, I think, this conversation or in the rulemaking process is going to be, a relatively, I don't know, fast pace is the right word, but there's going to be conversations about this policy that happened both inside the rulemaking advisory committee process, and then when you all as advisory committee members go back to your organizations and have conversations and your constituents and your stakeholders about this process, which we highly encourage you to do, to inform how you're going to be presenting into this body. I think our ask or suggestion in this process is to say, that you're having these conversations, and that, a piece of written testimony may be forthcoming on a particular issue, or you are going to be, organizing with other groups outside of this process or something like that. I think a surprise and something we would prefer to avoid is, if a collection of folks or rulemaking advisory committee members came and offered a policy option that was circumventing this process or outside of the goals of what we're trying to accomplish here in the direction that we have. So more about how you're coming to present options and how you're having conversations about the policies.
Is that helpful, Shane?
I think I understood 60% of it, but I'll just look around with staff if I end up having further questions. Thank you.
Okay. And some of these, get defined as they happen, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, keep asking, right, Shane, if and others, if you have concerns around like what would that really look like. I think the sense is that there's a power to bringing things into this room and respecting your colleagues to have those conversations in good faith and using this space for its full intention. And I think it's both for, to what you described, Ethan, in terms of circumventing the process. I would also offer, right, that DLCD has the obligation not to surprise you all, right, to give information ahead of time to make sure you have the thinking that's coming into the room with as much notice as possible, and not kind of springing things on you in real time. So there's probably a lot of ways to interpret that. And I wanted to bring you in, and you'll see this is a habit of mine. If you put something in the chat, I'll ask you to speak to it. I think it's pretty straightforward, but do you want to kind of talk about what it means to remain open-minded, to remind folks to kind of not get stuck in their spaces? And then we'll go to you, Miranda. Anne?
sure. Thank you. I think what staff has put together is amazing. All the materials are great, and probably it's covered in this point. But I think it's also really important to try to remain open-minded and willing to change your perspective when you hear new information from other people. So sometimes we just come with these preconceived ideas that we feel very strongly about, and we sort of forget to maybe be open to revising our feelings about, approaches or ideas. So just being willing to change your mind, I guess.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And it's certainly the first bullet around learning and understanding other perspectives, but also it's kind of we might call trying on, right? Trying on different ways of thinking and remain open-minded. I mean, I appreciate you just naming that. I mean, we have folks that have done this work for decades around this room that have strong values, strong opinions, really fixed visions, are paid to do the work in certain ways, any number of things that I think could lead to what you're trying to describe an antidote towards. And so thank you for just naming and challenging this group to think in that direction. Miranda, jump in.
Yeah, thanks. This is in a similar vein, and it is really, I think, something that I'd like to name, which is, the same way that we want to think about our implicit biases in a number of ways. I think part of the conversations I've heard over the last couple of years often are pointing fingers or are kind of stereotyping certain sectors, not just, even people, but trying to, I guess, characterizing developers all as being the same, or characterizing city planning that every city kind of operates the same, or, has the same problems, or all have the same barriers. And I think most of us that are in this room know it's very nuanced. And so I think that part of listening with respect and promoting collaboration through this process will be to remember that, not all developers think or operate the same way. Not all cities think or operate the same way. Not all processes through urban reserves or UGBs have all been the same. And that for us to really be open-minded to the varying perspectives that even fall within kind of one genre or sector, I think is going to be very important for us to make sure that we're hearing from the tax, the technical advisory groups, that they're going to be offering really good information and advice on how to actually implement the policies. So I wanted to kind of note that, because I think some of the dialogue I have heard over the past few years has been very blaming or pointing fingers, and it's creating a more divisive environment in the way that we operate on a day-to-day basis. I'm even seeing it in interactions kind of just in the day-to-day work that we do in the city. So I think part of our job here is to kind of help to reunite and collaborate around this problem, to help solve it together, and then to help reinforce that collaboration through the work that we then go back and do every day to implement and actually get housing produced. So thank you for listening.
No, thank you for adding that. And, just as a point, we pride ourselves at Kearns and West of collaborative problem solving, and what I hear in that is, we have to avoid the tropes, avoid the blames, right? Not get stuck in the narratives that have created the type of tensions that have prevented progress. And we have this unique opportunity with the diversity of perspective and expertise and experience around this room to imagine differently and ground ourselves in solutions, being solution-oriented, solution-minded, and really appreciate, recognize, and debate and dialogue around where those differences exist, but not falling into those old narratives that are harmful and that create polarization. Where do we find ourselves aligned, and when we're not, let's not do that because it's a preconceived narrative, or someone's evil and someone's good. So let's avoid those pieces. Thank you, Miranda, for naming it in the way you did. Commissioner.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I'll add to that in the same way that not only is it about perspectives, but the other piece I would say is that I sometimes find folks digging in on the way we've done things and framing those as sort of immutable laws of nature or laws of physics that drive the way things happen. And what it really comes down to is we're making choices, that we're making certain choices about how we do things and what the outcomes are. And so I'd remind us that there are some laws of physics, there are some laws of nature that are immutable, but even in housing development, there are some truths there, but some of them aren't. They're just choices we're making about how we're moving forward in the work we're doing. And so I'll continue to try to suss out which are immutable and which are choices that we can make differently in the future.
Yeah, thanks for framing it in that way, Shannon.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate this discussion so much. And I also find myself, maybe it's almost a process question as much as anything. So while we pride ourselves, I think appropriately, on the West Coast and being progressive and doing things that are outside of the box, fortunately, in my state role with supporting our 24 local habitat affiliates, I get to talk to my colleagues across the United States. And there's some really cool things happening other places too. So whether it's information we might know that's relevant to the TAC and or this RAC process, how do we bring in those positive examples? Whether they're happening at municipalities or at state levels, like how can we steward? There's that tension, right, between good ideas and being creative, and also this is just working over here. Can we do this thing that seems like it gets to all the goals we've just talked about here? So what's the right space for that kind of perspective or information various of us might have to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I would just put it back to you all. I mean, my initial response is that you all are observing and exploring and researching and listening to models that exist in other places. And I guess I would put the onus on each and every one of you in this room to say, how do I bring this example in that helps inform our conversation? And I just appreciate you naming, right? Like our kind of self-love for our progressive nature in Oregon, can be a crutch at times, right? And prevents us from opening up a wider view of what's possible. And tropes that exist around other places, right? It's impossible. I don't know. I shouldn't use examples, but is Kansas doing something, or Texas, right, or whatever, right? Like, we can open up our minds to spaces that may not seem like the progressive reality of a place like Oregon, but actually have really important things to offer our process. So Shannon, I don't have an answer for you other than you all seeking that opportunity. Ethan?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Ben. I'll just add, I think the rulemaking advisory committee process is the venue for that, Shannon. Like raising those examples will be one of the things that we'll talk about right at the end of this meeting is that after every rulemaking advisory committee will send committee meeting, we'll send out a post-meeting survey about the conversation that we had in this meeting today, and if you have any additional thoughts that you weren't able to articulate in the meeting, or if after reflection you have something else to say. And I think that's a really good venue for capturing those, like, oh, by the way, let's check out what X jurisdiction is doing in this regard, and this might be a good example. I would also say that part of this project team is a group of consultants who are here to help us do that kind of technical analysis, best practices, lit reviews, to inform the rules. And I think once we get a little further along in this process, there's going to be, big shiny opportunities to say, oh, also let's think about this other way that's been, practiced elsewhere, and kind of using that, incorporating that into our decision-making process is going to be critical. So
that's helpful. Thanks for the reminder of the infrastructure that surrounds you all. So I know I put this onus on you all to bring it in, but you can also ask those questions and set those expectations, right? So whether it's some of our consultant teams or DLCD, if you all have, are there examples? What happened when they did that, right? There's questions like that that may emerge that we may not know the answer to, or you might say, has anyone tried this in this way? And I think it becomes then the onus on the team surrounding the RAC and the tax to be able to help research or bring that back to the group. I'd love any other thoughts or comments on this piece. I'd love, I know we haven't heard from everyone in this room. I'd love to invite folks who haven't contributed, if there's any reflections. It can be on this topic or anything that we've covered today, but just do want to invite folks who haven't brought their voice into the room yet to create a little space for you all. I won't single you out. I might single you out later in other meetings, but I won't single you out today. But I do want to just create a little space and a pause if there's folks who haven't contributed that just want to reflect, share, or provide any input. Yeah, Mary Kyle, please.
It's actually just a question. Will we ever have opportunities for meeting in person, which I know is not easy for people who are more far flung, but I think that would go a long way towards developing relationships and getting to know people we don't already know.
That's a great question, Mary Kyle. I was already lamenting. I was like, oh, I wish we were eating bagels and coffee 10 minutes before the meeting kind of thing, or having those hallway conversations during break. Ethan, I'll pass it to you in terms of what y'all are thinking.
Yeah, Mary Kyle, I think that's definitely something we're interested in and are not foreclosing the idea of that. I think it's, it's just a matter of being able to coordinate that process and giving people the heads up to make their travel arrangements, considering we have a pretty geographically diverse group here. So yeah, definitely something we'll continue to talk about throughout this process. But I agree. I think having at least one or more of those in-person meetings throughout this process is going to be super helpful.
Yeah, and then Shauna, let's hear from you. And then I did want to raise a point that goes back to what Shannon was bringing up, but Sean, jump in.
Well, and I was just going to add, maybe you're already thinking of this, Ethan, but maybe you can find out when some of our more far-flung members might be in like the Willamette Valley. Because traveling in winter isn't really easy for some. So that'd be great.
Right. Thanks for naming that, Ethan.
Yeah, I think, trying to match that up with other opportunities for folks to participate, say, maybe it might make sense to kind of pair an in-person meeting with a Land Conservation Development Commission meeting, either the next day or that morning or something like that is something we can consider to kind of pull double duty there.
Yeah, thanks for that creative thinking. Sean, were you going to jump in?
Oh yeah, and just to note that, I think one of the things that we saw on a lot of the applications is that some folks are going to need an option to participate virtually at every meeting. So we'll want to make sure that we always provide that option. We've done hybrid meetings before. They can be challenging, but with enough prep, we're definitely open to it.
Yeah, thanks for naming that, right? There's different realities. So Mary Kyle, I appreciate you naming, right, the power of that connection and relationship that can occur in person. And, there's an element of place, right? When we're also not just in person, but where you are in person can make a difference. And folks have barriers to travel or, can best participate, of course, in a virtual environment in ways that might be less accessible in person. I did want to build from Shannon's comment. I think there's a natural question that also overlays with some of the public meeting and rules and regulations. So if folks want to, so there's two options. One, of course, bring it into the room, always appropriate, of course. If someone was to see something that they wanted to have considered, how, right, you're not going to reply to everyone. How should they submit it? There's not probably a shared drive that we're using or anything that we can create. So what's the best mechanism, Ethan, for if folks have either questions or something that they want shared across the group, or they found this really cool new project that they wanted to put forward? How do we both make sure we have line of sight for other members and avoid, right, serial communications?
Yeah, what you mentioned there, Ben, serial communications is something that we'll have to be pretty careful of, considering these are you're a public body, and all of your public meetings are public meetings, and so the process that we're hoping to use here is that the communications from DLCD and the project team will come from most likely myself and Ingrid Caudell in terms of communication out, and then communication into DLCD will happen most likely through the survey, the post-meeting survey. So there's an opportunity there to provide written comment. We also, and I'm going to ask somebody to put this in the chat, an email address that'll go to the housing division, which is housing.dlcd@dlcd.oregon.gov, which is a long one. So if somebody could put that in the chat, that would be super helpful. That's our dedicated email address for all housing, and we'll use that to capture any kind of written testimony or thoughts that would like to be shared with the rest of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Most likely those are going to be shared as part of the meeting packets that we'll share with the group before 7 days or more in advance of each of these Rulemaking Advisory Committee meetings.
Email just flows off. And one of the things I think, team, we can send after this is a link to public meeting training that's short, but just make sure you all understand kind of the environment that we're operating. I know many of you have operated in these environments, but those who haven't, by using language like serial communications, it means you can't really operate outside of this space. And so we can't be deliberating over email things that should be happening in this conversation. Becky, I thought I saw your hand.
Yeah, but then you answered a question. I was just going to say, some of us have been in public meetings, some of us have not. So you answered it, and that was what my voice was going to be, is like, we probably should just everybody be on the same page so nobody gets sideways unintentionally. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. So again, if I do want to open it up, if we haven't heard from you today, I'd love to just invite you into the space. You can offer any reflection. Otherwise, I'll take any final questions. So let's pause. Just anyone who hasn't contributed. Is there any feedback, reflection, questions? Okay. Well, thank you. So then any other final questions or reflections on this last conversation that we've had? Okay, well, not seeing any. I think we have some closing slides.
Yes. So, yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about timing here before we kind of close out this meeting. And thank you all for 3 hours of this conversation. Much appreciated. So in terms of timeline, rulemakings often use a quantity of years when we're talking about the timelines for rulemakings. In statute, HB 2001 defined a couple timelines for, or important milestones, I guess I'll call them, in this process that we're all kind of sprinting towards. The first is January 1st of 2025, which is the inaugural day of the new Oregon Housing Needs Analysis paradigm in the state of Oregon. So on January 1st, the big lofty, theoretical thing at this point, Oregon Housing Needs Analysis becomes the reality in housing planning. So in order for us to actually be able to implement that Oregon Housing Needs Analysis by January 1st of 2025, we have really the year of 2024 for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee to make recommendations and for LCDC to adopt rules to implement that program. And so, this timeline here is probably kind of difficult to read, and there's probably more information than is than necessary for the purpose of this conversation. But I just want to highlight that we're sitting here at the end of November in 2023. That really gives us 12 months, and if this group is meeting once a month, that means that we have a limited, finite amount of meetings to get through all of the work that we need to do. So I just want to kind of highlight that. And if we go to the next slide, this will kind of hopefully crystallize a little bit, which is that each of those technical advisory committees has been structured in a way that is matching the kind of three major policy areas or topic areas that we are embarking upon answering or addressing. So the first technical advisory committee related to housing needs and production. This is kind of like the policy side of the Goal 10 implementation. So these are things like, what does it actually mean to implement an Oregon housing needs analysis? What does it actually mean to integrate affirmatively furthering fair housing into the Goal 10 planning process? That technical advisory committee in that topic area, the statutory deadline for adopting rules to answer those questions is January 1st of 2025, which is the same day of implementation, but hopefully we can get those adopted, December-ish of 2024, so that there's some ramp up time to implementing those in the beginning of 2025. Additionally, there's a portion of HB 2001 and the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis process that speaks to accountability and enforcement of the Goal 10 planning process. So what is our collective shared responsibility, the responsibility of the state, responsibility of local governments to implement those kind of Oregon housing needs analysis provisions in the sections of HB 2001 and 2889, and what happens if a city is underperforming or not fulfilling those requirements. HB 2001 asks LCDC to establish that accountability and enforcement structure, and the Technical Advisory Committee on Housing Accountability is going to be having conversations about what that actually looks like and the steps in that process. That also has a deadline. Those rules also have a deadline of being adopted by January 1st of 2025. So kind of looking at those two as a package, those rules will go through the commission, LCDC public hearings process, probably starting in the fall of 2024, September, October, November time period, which further truncates our ability and our timeline to actually get to some draft rules. So hopefully this is kind of setting in a little bit that we don't really have all of 2024, and we really, we have a short amount of time. So again, just kind of highlighting the need to, come prepared, read the materials, participate as you feel like you're going to be able to inform this process. The third and final major topic area of this rulemaking process has a timeline that's 1 year later. So January 1st of 2026, we have some additional time to grapple with possibly the most contentious element of this process, which is housing capacity, urbanization, the urban growth boundary, growth management in the state of Oregon. How do we square the housing needs analysis, the Oregon housing needs analysis process, and the need to plan for more diverse and a greater number of housing choice and options into the process that we have as a state for growth management and conservation. And so that process is going to be working in conjunction and alongside the other two elements, but has just a longer timeline. So that process you'll probably see in the first portion of 2024 that we're focusing more on the housing needs and production and the housing accountability elements of this work, focusing less on the capacity and urbanization work, just because of the necessity to get through those first two pieces as sooner, a whole year sooner than the other element. So I'm happy to answer any questions here. We're going to go into much more detail on all of these major topics at the next meeting. That's the primary agenda item, is to dive deep into each of these three elements. So we'll have a chance to talk through like what all of these words on the page mean here in a lot more detail next time.
Yeah, let's go Becky and then Mercedes.
Yeah, mine's just really quick to, hop off of kind of what Ethan was talking about, that maybe Ethan or Ben, you guys could tell us what do those timeframes look like when you're doing an Oregon administrative rule? Because, I've done them a couple times and it's like 50 days or, well, it's more than 50 days, but like 50 days from the time you get it to the Secretary of State because there's public comment. So I think, your timeline for those of us that have done this, it's an aggressive timeline. There's a lot of work to do. So I just wanted, I think it's just important for us to all kind of have that understanding of the timing of that small component of this big picture. So just a comment.
Yeah. And if I could, Becky, you're exactly right. I mean, that timeline, you lose, weeks in that process just to prepare for those public hearing and the Secretary of State requirements to adopt, Oregon administrative rules, like all of those legal public hearing notices kind of evaporate some of that time on the back end. And I would point everybody to take a look at packet item number 10, which is our draft kind of schedule for both these meetings and the technical advisory committees. And that has some important deadlines highlighted in that schedule to show kind of when we're pencils down, when we're having public hearings, when draft rules are kind of expected to be ready to go for the commission's consideration. So we'll talk about, those timelines in more detail as we get further along in this process. And please feel free to take a look at that in the interim. But
yeah, thanks. Mercedes?
I'm just wondering if there's anybody, I didn't think I heard it during the introductions, from OHCS that is participating in this space or going to be.
There is, yes, there is. So the ex officio member from OHCS is Megan Bolton, but she's unable to attend today. So we have Brandon Schrader in the audience who's participating from OHCS today.
Okay, that's really helpful because I definitely think, especially around the accountability piece when it comes to affordable housing, a city can only do so much if their providers' applications keep getting rejected from OHCS. And then when we kind of start talking about urban growth boundary, if we want any affordable housing as part of those expansions, it's going to cost more because they're also needing to build out that infrastructure. And I think if we leave it up to the market also to just take care of that, then we're only building like the most expensive housing possible.
Yeah. Brandon, do you want to add anything or just popping in to make sure folks see there's a real live human OHCS that's in the meeting?
Yeah, I don't have anything particular to add. Just wanted OHCS to be represented. So thanks for the comment, though.
Okay, Ethan?
If I could, touch on that connection between, all of the state agency ex officio members who are part of this process are here to, listen in, participate, just like members of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, roster, and to follow along. I would say, in particular, the folks at OHCS and the Department of Administrative Services through the Office of Economic Analysis are, really kind of on deck to be the implementers of quote unquote the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. Sure, other agencies have, ties and connections to that, but those are the three agencies who are kind of named in the legislation. And so we're, as a result of that, working in very close coordination throughout this process. And we're, sharing, processes and informing each other in how our processes are unfolding.
Right. Thanks. Samantha?
Sure. And this is something I was gonna bring up earlier when we were talking about shared principles, but I forgot. But the comment from Mercedes just reminded me of it. A lot of what we focused on in the drafting of the statute was, when we were talking about accountability, talking about what is actually within the control of local governments and what are exterior factors that the market plays, that other things play into, that are outside of the control of what the state can actually do or what a local government can actually do. And I just want to flag for the group, there was a very strong shared commitment that local governments were, that one, any enforcement or anything that we for accountability would be proportionate, it would be realistic, and it would not be holding there. You can't hold things accountable for a local government has no control over. And I just want to reiterate that it is something that was a very strong point for the drafters and the passage of the bill.
Yeah, thanks, Samantha. And I'm sure that will be part of our conversations as we get into the accountability discussion and it's been a theme that's been woven through this conversation of, making sure that we're considering not just the values that are driving this, but what's the practical realities and expectations on the ground that make this work in the real world. So I appreciate you naming that. Ethan, did you want to add something?
No, I nothing else other than to say that is also actually articulated in statute. So that kind of approach into, how we structure that accountability system is inherent in, actually making good on the legislative intent and, complying with state housing laws.
Great, thank you. You want to keep going, Ethan? Not seeing any other hands. Yep.
This is my last slide, Ben. So I think we're in the right spot.
So we just did that. Let's go to next steps. So y'all, I think in your packet, if I remember correctly, don't thank everybody yet. In your packet, you did get a preview of meeting 1B. So if you see this as one large conversation that's really helping us ground our pathway forward, our fast and aggressive and very challenging timeline that we have in front of us. So as we go into the next conversation, I'll just, to the points that have been made, continue to familiarize yourself with what was provided in that meeting packet that you all received, the legislative intent, right? Just grounding ourselves in what we've heard and described in many different ways today. But we'll be really diving in at the next meeting, getting more background on goals 10 and 14, and more grounding on HB 2001 and 2889, and then really to Ethan's last slide, starting this conversation to get into those issue areas around needs and production, capacity, urbanization, housing accountability, and starting to really describe and talk about that relationship with the technical advisory committees. So we have, that, please familiarize yourself with that, and we'll be off and running. So I'll close us out just by saying thank you. Now we can go to the thank you slide. I just so appreciate this space. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to be in community with you all as we grapple with and really seize this incredible opportunity that we have. So Ethan, I'll go to you, and then Director Bateman, I didn't know if you wanted to add any final thoughts from your positionality, or Commissioner, if you'd like to add any final thoughts to close this out. So Ethan, let's start with you.
Yeah, Ben, thanks. I just wanted to kind of highlight two things in particular in terms of like immediate next steps and, some action on behalf of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee members. So one, probably in the next couple hours, you'll get an email from Ingrid with a post-RAC meeting survey. So this survey is going to be typically, I would say in future meetings, those survey responses are something that we would collect and then provide for the next Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting, because they'll be focused on kind of policy options, analysis, and alternatives in terms of the conversation that we're going to be having in the preceding meeting. However, this one is going to be focused on kind of how this meeting went, more about just process and your thoughts on how we could improve and things that you're like, oh gosh, I wish we talked about this, but we didn't, or how prepared and comfortable you felt in this meeting. So the responses to this version of that post-meeting survey are not going to be shared out with the rest of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, and are only for the purposes of the project team to kind of continually improve. So highly encourage you to take some time with that and fill that out as you're able to. And then secondly, we're also offering for first-time Rulemaking Advisory Committee members a meeting on December 18th. And this is kind of a drop-in meeting of sorts to ask some of those, questions that you just need to know about how this rulemaking process, particularly questions like, what is DLCD's role? I'm unfamiliar. Or like, what is the schedule? I'm not sure what a Secretary of State notice is. Those kind of questions, we're going to be kind of meeting on the 18th to, hold space and have that conversation. That meeting if I'm remembering correctly, is from 11 to 12:30 on the 18th. And the meeting information is going to be provided in that post-meeting email. So don't feel like we're not going to be talking any business or rules or policy or anything like that in that meeting. So your attendance is entirely optional. So I just wanted to mention those two things, Ben. Thanks.
Yeah, please. So Director Bateman or Commissioner Lazo, do you want to add any final thoughts? Yeah.
I just wanted to note that I was here, I was present, I was listening and learning along the way, although mostly eating off camera, which is why I often have my camera off. But thank you all for already the beginnings of this courageous and creative work. I'm really pleased that you all are here, and let us know if you need anything.
Thank you. Commissioner, in our last minus 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds worth, Ben, and just to thank you all. And it's so exciting, as I used the analogy before, to have this long baton passing period, and then we'll get right to work.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, it's 12 o'clock on the dot, so that's facilitator success, I guess. Appreciate y'all. We'll see you very soon for meeting 1B. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Much love. Be well. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.